I was writing this bit in my post-book follow-up for Animorphs 23 The Pretender, but have now decided to split it off and expand it for a few reasons. First off, it would have made my review just way too long. And secondly, it covers aspects of the Animorphs series as a whole, not to number 23 specifically. I'm aware that a few people who watch my reviews have not actually read Animorphs all the way through and are learning about the series through my reviews, and I figured it'd be fair to separate this as it'll cover many spoilers for books I have not yet reviewed. If you want to avoid spoilers, I recommend waiting till I finish reviewing all the books before watching this, which at my pace will be around 2018. It is of my opinion that Tobias and Elfangor's relationship, that of father and son, is one of the more perplexing and odd elements in the entire Animorphs series. Its presence seems confoundingly unnecessary in many aspects, and outright conflicting with the motivation of the character the Ellimist, which I'll get to in a moment. A base of comparison for the whole Tobias/Elfangor thing is the relationship between Marco and Visser 1, who has taken Marco's mother as a host body. On the standpoint of moralistic values, they seem at direct odds with each other. Marco is the colder, more realistic, more ruthless Animorph, and therefore gets a relative on the side of the baddies, whereas Tobias is far more emotional and wishy-washy, and therefore gets a relative on the side of the goodies. Thematically, it would seem to apply values to certain character traits, that of cold steel ruthlessness versus playing by the heart. However, outside of that, comparing Marco/Visser 1 and Tobias/Elfangor is like comparing a well-oiled machine to a pile of Lincoln logs, as Marco's stories concerning his relationship with his mother hit a steady series of notes that make it a gripping tale to watch unfold, while it seemed as though Tobias' story about his father never seemed to take off. Part of that might be because Elfangor was long dead by this point, while Visser 1 kept showing up, but it seems as though that the big reveal at the end of number 23 got demoted to a simple bit of trivia for the rest of the series. For example, Tobias tells everyone about his relationship with Elfangor off-screen, so we never get to see anyone's reaction to it. I imagine Marco would be completely dismissing. Rachel would have to find a way to cope with it, and Axel would be pulled into a new level of kinship about learning that Tobias is his frickin' uncle. Now, Marco revealing that Visser 1 was his mother to the rest of the team was a big deal. First because it shook the Animorphs up a bit, and because it was a big emotional release for Marco. Indeed, Tobias and Elfangor's relationship plays the most token of roles throughout the rest of the series. Arguably, the biggest contribution to this relationship has in the rest of the series is number 33, The Illusion, in which Tobias morphs Axe and treats it like getting to know his ancestry. That's it. That's all she wrote. When that's the extent to which the Tobias-Elfangor thing goes, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing really would have changed if Tobias never found out. Hell, it might have even been better, a dirty little secret to be shared only between the author and the readers. However, this does indirectly affect the nature of the Ellimist, believe it or not. See, in Megamorphs 4, Back to Before, we learn that the Animorphs were largely not a random selection of kids, but with the exception of Jake and Rachel, were handpicked by the Ellimist. Marco is the son of Visser 1, Axe is Elfangor's brother, Cassie will eventually learn is a borderline superhero, and then of course we have Tobias. And it really seems as though that the Ellimist spent more time on him than any of the other Animorphs. Think of it this way. The Ellimist constructs the time matrix for no foreseeable reason, since there isn't anything it can do that the Ellimist can't do on his own. Now, this isn't confirmed in the books, but it's my theory that the time matrix was given to the Pemalites, a species of the Ellimist's own creation, since the Pemalites have no tendencies towards violence. So the Ellimist-created species takes the Ellimist-created device to Earth, where the Pemalites created robotic species known as the Chi bury it under the Great Pyramids. Thousands of years later, it's discovered by a band of Skritna on the same trip to Earth that results in Lauren being abducted. The Andalites save Lauren, Lauren meets Elfangor, the events of the Andalite Chronicles happens, Elfangor escapes to Earth. Now, the Ellimist claims he didn't want Elfangor mucking around with time travel, but instead of picking up Elfangor and returning him to the Andalites immediately, he waits for several years for Elfangor to marry Lauren and conceive Tobias. Certainly, that's not enough proof to say that the Ellimist influenced these events simply for Tobias to be conceived, right? But wait, there's more. In the Andalite Chronicles, when Lauren approached the Time Matrix, it caused her to physically age, so she ends up creating an alternate timeline where she had been born earlier to compensate for that. Now, I'll discuss the Time Matrix in detail when we get to Megamorphs 3, Elfangor's Secret, but for now, let's just know that when we are reintroduced to the Time Matrix in that book, nothing remotely similar to that aging effect occurs. It only happens in that one instance. If Lauren had remained her original age, it would therefore be more likely that Tobias would have been born several years later than he is, and thus wouldn't have gone to school with the other Animorphs. This effect seems to imply that the Ellimist needed to correctly align the timeline in order for Tobias to be successfully join the Animorphs. But wait, there's more. Tobias wouldn't even have gone with the group to the construction site in number 1, The Invasion, if it hadn't been for the Ellimist. Remember number 13, The Change? The Ellimist sent Tobias back in time to acquire his younger self. The future Tobias then plants the idea of Tobias walking with the rest of the Animorphs through the construction site into the younger Tobias' head. Probably subconsciously, since the younger Tobias was drowsy from a lack of sleep and the effects of future Tobias acquiring him. None of the other Animorphs have anything close to this amount of extensive influence from the Ellimist. Hell, you could even argue that the Ellimist pissing off Rachel in number 7, The Stranger, was a means to get Rachel and Tobias closer. What you can gather from all this is that Tobias was probably going to be the Ellimist's ace card, his main weapon against the Yeerk's invasion of Earth. But you know what? That doesn't really happen. In fact, Tobias was arguably the least important of the main 6 when it came down to the endgame. Not to say that he wasn't important at all, just that he didn't seem to deliver on the payoff that the Ellimist seemed to have been building up for. If you wanted, you could probably make this into an argument against the Ellimist's supposed total omniscience, which, for the record, he never claimed. Jake and Rachel were arguably the 2 biggest players in the endgame, and they were the 2 random elements that the Ellimist hadn't handpicked, while his star player went and committed genocide and complained about water. In that case, it's pretty damn lucky the Earth was saved in the end at all. This shares the same problem with the Tobias-Elfangor relationship. There's a lot of build-up, and virtually no payoff. When I started this series, Tobias was my favorite character. His first 2 books were so good because they were about confusing emotions without instilling authority into those emotions like a Cassie book. However, between this non-start aspect of his storyline and, of course, his actions in Megamorphs 2, he fell down to the 5th best main character, except for when number 19, The Departure, and number 29, The Sickness, came out, and Cassie would become temporarily awesome. I have no real conclusionary thoughts here, as this was meant to be a simple point of discussion in my original review and not an essay in itself. So yeah, well, what do you think? I look forward to your thoughts.